I'd like to first say thank you to our witnesses for joining us here. Today's hearing will provide a very important opportunity to discuss the rising threat posed by ransomware attacks and the role that cryptocurrencies play in enabling these harmful cyber crimes. In recent years, we have seen a scourge of increasingly complex and sophisticated ransomware attacks on both the public and private networks, where the attackers prevent access to an entity's computer systems or threaten to release stolen data unless a ransom is paid. From the Kaseya ransomware attack that affected between 800 and 1,500 small businesses, to alarming attacks on our critical infrastructure that caused gas shortages across the East Coast and temporarily shut down processing plants for the world's largest meat supplier, ransomware attacks have caused significant disruptions to daily life and imposed serious economic cost. A single ransomware attack can force businesses to close their doors permanently, even if they pay the ransom demand. Cyber criminals may shut down computer systems, expose sensitive data, or erase data entirely, causing significant disruption to business continuity. Some of the longer-term impacts may include lost revenues, reduced profits, damage to brand reputation, employee layoffs, and loss of customers. These malign actors almost exclusively demand cryptocurrencies when extorting large sums of money, because they can take steps to obscure their transactions and circumvent regulatory scrutiny, making payments more difficult to trace. In 2020, according to Chain Analysis study, malicious hackers received at least $692 million in cryptocurrency extorted as part of ransomware attacks, up from $152 million in 2019, and over a 300% increase year to year. These figures are likely a drastic underestimation of the actual number of attacks and ransomware payments that are made by victims. While Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies provide a public ledger of transactions known as blockchain, cryptocurrency wallets are not tied to an individual person, meaning account holders can take steps to conceal their identity to avoid being held accountable for criminal activities. Anti-money laundering and other banking regulations that are meant to prevent criminal use of currency, including cryptocurrency, are also often inconsistently enforced, particularly in foreign jurisdictions where many attackers are based. For example, last year, according to Chain Analysis, approximately 74% of global ransomware revenue went to entities either likely located in Russia or controlled by the Russian government. And the attacks from Russian-based entities are only expected to increase, especially as the United States continues to support Ukraine against their illegal and immoral invasion. Last month, I released a report examining the role of cryptocurrency plays in incentivizing and enabling ransomware attacks and the resulting harm that these attacks have had on victims. I will now move to introduce this report as part of the hearing record, and hearing no objection, this report will be entered into the record. My investigation found that the federal government lacks sufficient data and information on ransomware attacks and the use of cryptocurrency as ransom payment in these attacks, and must collect better data to understand the scope of the threat. The Cyber Incident Reporting Law that Ranking Member Portman and I authored and passed earlier this year marks a significant first step to getting the information the government needs to combat this growing threat. The legislation will require critical infrastructure owners and operators to report cyber attacks within 72 hours and ransomware payments within 24 hours. And I look forward to working with the administration to ensure that it's swiftly and efficiently implemented. The more information that we have, the better suited we will be to combat ransomware attacks. That means continuing to build off our bipartisan cyber incident reporting legislation by holding foreign adversaries and cyber criminals accountable, and finding ways to reduce the incentives to conduct these attacks in the first place, including by examining their use of cryptocurrency. While I'm grateful to the many federal law enforcement and regulatory agencies that have taken steps to address cyber criminals and the rising threat of ransomware attacks, more must be done to ensure cryptocurrencies are monitored appropriately like their non-digital counterparts. And finally, in addition to addressing ransomware attacks and the use of cryptocurrency as ransom payment in those attacks, Congress must examine other criminal activity involving cryptocurrency that threatens our nation's national and economic security, such as human trafficking, the flow of illicit drugs across our borders, and other serious crimes. I look forward to our hearing today and to hear from our panel of experts who can further elaborate on the uses of cryptocurrency in ransomware attacks and provide answers to ensure that we have the necessary tools and resources to tackle this issue head-on. With that, I would like to recognize our ranking member of this committee, Ranking Member Portman, for his opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses for being with us today, some in person, some virtually. We're going to hear from a private sector panel of cybersecurity professionals and incident responders who are going to provide us with a unique perspective in each case on what can be done to combat ransomware. Obviously, the frequency and severity of these ransomware attacks continues to concern us because it continues to grow. Ransomware groups have professionalized their operations using a business model often now called ransomware as a service, which involves ransomware developers selling or delivering their malware to individuals called affiliates who actually carry out the attack. It's a business model. This allows ransomware gangs to conduct more attacks with broader impact. In March of this year, I released a report documenting the experiences of 3 American companies victimized by the most notorious Russian ransomware gangs called REvil. The companies profiled in the report are from different business sectors and vary significantly in size, revenue, and their IT resources. This was done on purpose to try to show that this is affecting companies of every size and sophistication. Despite these differences, all these companies fell victim to REvil. This underscores the broad threat ransomware presents and the proactive steps all organizations must take to implement cyber security best practices. REvil was largely believed to be offline following the arrests of several key members last fall. But public reports indicate the gang may be resuming operations. We know it is common for ransomware criminals to claim retirement only to rebrand and reemerge under a new name. About a year ago, this committee held a hearing on the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. That incident was a painful reminder to many Americans that the attacks have real-world consequences impacting everybody. Recognition of this challenge is one of the reasons Chairman Peters and I drafted cyber incident reporting legislation, which I'm proud to say became law a couple of months ago. This law will enhance our nation's visibility into cyber attacks against the United States and will enable a more effective response, including warning potential victims. It's really important that CISA works with industry experts and stakeholders to implement this law immediately. We know ransomware attacks will continue to be a national security threat for the foreseeable future. As the Committee of Jurisdiction over Cybersecurity, we will continue to work to identify solutions that address these threats associated with ransomware attacks and the ways we can fortify our defenses. Today we're going to have testimony from some real witnesses, some real experts to ensure that we are making steps in the right direction. And I look forward to that testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. It's the practice of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses, so if each of you will please stand and raise your right hand, including folks joining us or joining us online. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yeah. Everyone has answered affirmatively. You may be seated. Our first witness is Megan Stiefel, Chief Strategy Officer at the Institute for Security and Technology, or IST, a partnership that provides public and private sector guidance on security and technology. In 2021, IST released a comprehensive report on combating ransomware. Ms. Stiefel previously served as an attorney in the National Security Division at the Department of Justice, where she also spent time detailed as a director for international cyber policy on the National Security Council. She also previously served as a senior policy counsel for Global Cyber Alliance. Welcome, Ms. Stiefel. You may now proceed with your opening remarks.
Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the critical importance of information about ransomware attacks and associated payments in combating the ongoing ransomware scourge. My name is Megan Stiefel, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer at the Institute for Security and Technology, or IST. We are a Bay Area-based nonprofit organization focused on staying ahead of security challenges resulting from our increasing dependence on technology. Our current work focuses on nuclear command and control, artificial intelligence, digital cognition and democracy, and most relevant for today's purposes, information security. Early last year, in response to the growing threat posed by the escalating rise in ransomware incidents targeting critical infrastructure, IST convened the Ransomware Task Force, and I had the privilege of being a co-chair. The task force included participants from industry, academia, civil society, and governments, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, as well as multilateral organizations such as Europol. In total, 60 plus organizations participated, including the organizations represented by my fellow witnesses. In a span of 4 months, this coalition worked to identify measures to help all stakeholders better deter, disrupt, prepare, and respond to ransomware. As noted, we published a report last spring, including 4 goals, 5 priority recommendations, and a series of recommended actions in totaling 48. The priority recommendations included the need for a sustained, coordinated, US-led, multi-stakeholder collective action to meaningfully reduce the ransomware threat, an intelligence-driven anti-ransomware campaign, including support for operational collaboration with industry, the establishment of ransomware response and recovery funds, frameworks for preparation and mandated reporting of payments, as well as closer international regulation of the cryptocurrency sector that enables ransomware crime. As noted just after the report's publication, several high-profile ransomware attacks occurred, leading to this disruption of fuel and meat production, distribution, as well as healthcare. These incidents formed a pivotal moment since which significant progress has been made in countering ransomware. Much of this progress aligns with the task force's recommendations. Still, much work remains. I'll focus my testimony today on the task force's recommendations related to information about ransomware incidents, especially payments, in helping government and industry effectively combat ransomware. Before I address the essential role of information in the ransomware lifecycle, I have to pause and emphasize that ransomware is a symptom of a broader problem, and that problem originated decades ago through a confluence of factors, each of which must be addressed to put a significant dent in the ransomware-related cybercrime, but also in all aspects of cybersecurity risk and resulting cybercrime. Ransomware is 21st century extortion, but extortion is not a 21st century invention. New forms of extortionware are emerging. Thus, in examining collective measures by industry and government to combat ransomware, we are not just targeting today, we are working to better secure tomorrow against wherever these criminals turn next. In my testimony before the House last year, I noted the task force's recommendations that the scope and quality of information about ransomware incidents must improve. The reasons for this are manyfold. Higher quality information can better equip governments and other stakeholders in developing the international strategy the task force called for to reduce ransomware risk at scale. It can also provide more detailed evidence to support a range of measures that can reduce the ability of these actors to operate from safe havens. Of perhaps equal importance, higher quality information can better inform the private sector's ability to protect its customers' rights and property, as well as enhance its capacity to collaborate with the government in combating ransomware and other cyber crimes. As the task force noted in April 2021, improving the quality and volume of ransomware information would better enable deterrence, enhance preparedness, and inform disruption activities. There were several recommendations in the report. Since ransomware is often a criminal endeavor to extract financial gain, one of the most effective tools in combating it is to follow the money. Information shared through voluntary and mandatory incident reporting, including of ransom payments, is this tool's lifeblood. Yet, to this date, we have not found an adequate incentive structure to meaningfully empower this capability at scale. As depicted in the ransomware payment diagram submitted with my written testimony, a range of organizations may have information that can enable public and private sector entities to follow the money. Today, however, there are only partial views spread across many stakeholders without a common process or pathway to stitch the pieces together. Ultimately, there should be harmony among government reporting avenues. This would ease confusion among victims and streamline the collection of and analysis of attack information. The recently passed reporting legislation will address aspects of this challenge. However, the need for consistency across reporting pathways is more immediate. It is especially critical while the rulemaking process is underway. It is also essential regardless of the rulemaking process, given the scope of entities that will likely be required to report pursuant to or elect to share voluntarily under the legislation. To meet the risks of tomorrow, information gathered must be useful and it must be appropriately disseminated within a meaningful period of time. It is also important to note that the same information may be of different value depending on the agency's or organization's mission. I must also pause to emphasize the need the task force placed on enabling disruptive capabilities through these channels. Disruptive actions taken in the past year to seize cryptocurrency assets could scale significantly if clear, concise, actionable information is made available to appropriate organizations as early as possible in the cryptocurrency kill chain. Thank you for the opportunity to participate today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Stiefel. Our next witness is Bill Segal, CEO and co-founder of Coveware, a cyber incident response firm that specializes in assisting victims of ransomware attacks. Mr. Segal previously served as the Chief Financial Officer for the cybersecurity rating company Security Scorecard and the Chief Executive Officer of Second Market and the head of NASDAQ Private Market. Mr. Segal, you may proceed with your opening remarks.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share Coveware's perspective on ransomware attacks and the role of cryptocurrency in ransom payments. My testimony today is derived from Coveware's experience, which spans thousands of ransomware incidents over the last few years. During a given incident, we interact with the victim of the attack, privacy attorneys, forensic investigators, restoration firms, cyber insurance companies, and the law enforcement agencies that investigate these attacks. Throughout the incident, we collect data firsthand, and the aggregated learnings from these data and our experience gives us a unique perspective on this problem. We collect and organize this data because, like any problem, you can't solve it until you understand it. The analogy we use is that you can't build safe cars without studying lots of car crashes. In addition to analysis, our firm has voluntarily and proactively reported subsets of our data to law enforcement from every attack we've ever worked on since inception of our firm. This data is used by law enforcement to augment active investigations into the criminal groups that carry out these attacks. We're grateful for the work that Chairman Peters and Ranking Member Portman, along with the committee staff, have already completed in publishing the staff report, Case Studies in Ransomware Attacks on American Companies, and the majority staff report, Use of Cryptocurrency in Ransomware Attacks, Available Data, and National Security Concerns. Both of these reports highlight acute issues that we are grateful that this committee is collaborating with public and private industry on, and that the committee members are already pursuing new and passing new legislation. I'd like to quickly address two primary areas of focus in these reports. First, with regards to cryptocurrency. Financially motivated cyber criminals almost universally denominate their ransom demands in cryptocurrency. The popularity of cryptocurrency with cyber criminals is rooted in protecting the ransom payment from law enforcement seizure and the efficiency with which the money can be laundered. The percentage of a ransom that finds its way to a cyber criminal's pocket is substantially higher when cryptocurrency is used versus other currencies or stores of value. This is clear when looking at the recovery rates between two types of cybercrime, wire fraud and ransomware. If reported within 72 hours, illegitimate wires can typically be reversed and recovered. No such mechanism exists with cryptocurrency. It's important to note that unlike financial theft, ransomware is much more akin to a kidnap and ransom incident, though. Victims may not want their funds reclaimed out of fear that the criminals will not reciprocate with decryption keys critical to restore an organization's business. Reclaiming a ransom also requires that the victim make a timely report to the correct branch of law enforcement. Moreover, for a trace and seizure to be successful, the end destination of the cryptocurrency must be within the reach of Western law enforcement. Most of the time, one or several of these variables inhibit a trace and seizure from even being started, let alone successful. It's also important to note that some form of currency, whether it be physical, fiat, digital, or cryptocurrency, has always been used for lots of different types of extortion. Ransomware existed before the advent of cryptocurrency, and it will persist if cryptocurrency were ever to disappear. As long as ransomware attacks are profitable to carry out against organizations with weak cybersecurity, cyber criminals will continue to proliferate these attacks. This brings us to the second topic of today's hearing, mandatory reporting. Coveware has been vocal in our support for mandatory reporting for some time. Our hope is that the reporting requirements will eventually be extended to all victims of ransomware, not just organizations under the oversight of CISA. As with any new law, the efficacy lies in its implementation. This hearing is uniquely timed to allow policymakers to understand the dynamics of reporting and to ensure that the final rules achieve the targeted impact. We believe there will be two primary impacts to mandatory reporting. First, the U.S. government will gain clarity on the scope of the problem As was clearly documented in the majority staff report, the variance between privately reported ransomware statistics and agency-reported statistics is cavernous. Collecting accurate statistics is step number one in table stakes. Gaining clarity will allow agencies to more confidently resource their responses, and we're encouraged to see that the Cyber Incident Reporting Act, authored by Chairman Peters and Ranking Member Portman, has begun to outline a clear path for reporting and unique agency responsibility. The second impact will be providing greater clarity on what to do about the problem. Gaining this clarity will hinge on what information CISA collects and if CISA and other regulatory or law enforcement agencies are able to scalably digest the information reported to them. This new legislation has the potential to answer major questions and enable CISA, the FBI, DHS, and other agencies to make meaningful progress on this problem. If not implemented correctly, however, this new legislation also has the potential to completely bury these agencies with unstructured data that cannot be parsed or analyzed at scale. This would render this new legislation completely ineffectual. Great care and focus should be applied to what information is collected and how this information is organized so that the velocity of analysis, recommendations, and actions can achieve maximum efficacy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to answering the committee's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Segal. Our final witness is Jackie Burns-Coven, Head of Cyber Threat Intelligence at Chainalysis, or how do you pronounce that?
Chainalysis, Senator.
Chainalysis. One of the leading cyber analytics companies that specializes in providing data, software, services, and research on blockchain technology. Ms. Coven has extensive knowledge and experience in the cybersecurity sector, and as the head of cyber threat intelligence, Ms. Coven leads efforts to track ransomware operators and their enablers on blockchains. Since prior to joining Chainalysis, Ms. Coven served in the intelligence community. Ms. Coven, welcome. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today on this very important topic. My name is Jacqueline Coven, and I'm the head of cyber threat intelligence for the blockchain data platform Chainalysis. In this role, I track ransomware operators and their enablers on the blockchain. I also coordinate with global law enforcement, ransomware research, partnerships, and joint initiatives. This hearing could not be more timely. We have seen ransomware attacks increase significantly over the last few years, with ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure, law enforcement agencies, healthcare providers, municipalities, schools, and other businesses. While it is true that cryptocurrency is generally the predominant form of payment in these cases, it is not true that cryptocurrency is the cause of ransomware attacks. If there's one point I want to make to members of this committee, it is that the transparency of cryptocurrency and blockchains enhances the ability of policymakers and government agencies to detect, attribute, and ultimately disrupt illicit activity. In fact, it can be much easier to investigate cases involving the illicit use of cryptocurrency than other forms of payment. By identifying an illicit actor's cryptocurrency wallet, for example, from a ransom payment, law enforcement can gain insight into not only the cash-out destination, but also the network of accomplices and malicious tools underpinning the threat actor's campaign. In contrast, in a traditional financial investigation where that same threat actor is tied to a bank account, it is just the beginning of a long, resource-intensive process to subpoena records that can seldom generate a remotely comparable amount of insight and certainly not as timely. The investigative challenges would compound even more were that same illicit actor tied to a cash-based transaction. Our ransomware data shows that there were at least $712 million worth of ransom payments in 2021, and while almost certainly an undercount of ransoms paid, this figure constitutes a record-breaking year in terms of ransomware revenue. This shows the magnitude of the ransomware problem and underscores the importance of enhanced reporting initiatives. One of the biggest trends we've recently observed is an increase in the rebranding of ransomware strains. This is likely in part to evade government scrutiny, but also in some cases to obfuscate a ransomware group's connection to a sanctioned entity so that victims might still pay. We can often discern these rebrand attempts via blockchain analysis, which enables us to identify links between ransomware gangs using their cryptocurrency footprint. Extortion tactics have also evolved to skirt traditional definitions of ransomware. More groups have emerged that won't encrypt victims' files, but will still exfiltrate data and threaten to release or sell the data unless a ransom is paid. This trend means that policymakers and government agencies will need to be flexible about cyber attack definitions when requesting reporting on these events to encompass emerging threats. I further detail the evolution of ransomware groups in my written testimony, including the geopolitical aspects of this threat, ransomware money laundering techniques, and the impact of law enforcement and OFAC actions against ransomware actors and their facilitators. U.S. policies must leverage a whole-of-government approach for reducing ransomware attacks and mitigating their impact that incorporates private-public sector partnerships. In my written testimony, I make a number of recommendations for this committee and Congress to consider in order to improve the government response to this threat, and I will share just a few of these now. First, it is vital that we improve ransomware reporting and information sharing. There should be clear guidance on when, what, and where to report incidents, and this information should be shared swiftly with law enforcement agencies to operationalize. In addition, we must ensure government agencies have adequate funding for the training, tools, and resources they need to conduct these investigations that require the development of new skill sets and government agencies to work quickly in order to keep up with the evolving threat landscape. Finally, the U.S. should also work with other countries around the world to assist them in the development and implementation of robust anti-money laundering laws for cryptocurrency businesses to ensure that bad actors are cut off from cashing out their ill-gotten gains in unregulated jurisdictions. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Coven. On May 24th, after a 10-month investigation, I released a report on the rise in ransomware attacks and the use of cryptocurrency as ransom payments in these attacks. That report I entered into the record in my opening comments. One of my report's key findings is that the federal government simply does not have comprehensive data on ransomware threat landscape. So, Ms. Stiefel, I have two questions for you. First off, do you agree with this finding? And second, in the Institute for Security and Technology's Ransomware Task Force report, your organization advocates for mandatory reporting requirements on ransomware attack payments made in cryptocurrency. Why do you believe that this data is necessary? If you could answer both those questions, I'd appreciate it.
Senator, I do agree with the observation that, or the finding that there is not sufficient information within the government's holdings about payments in cryptocurrencies. We know, as been highlighted in the testimony of Ms. Coven, as well as Mr. Siegel, that there are many who do, attempt to comply with these requirements and regulations. However, there are also those who do not, and this leads to a significant amount of discrepancy in the amount of information that may be available to those in the ecosystem versus those who are receiving the information on the government side. The other challenge here is that within the organizations that do collect information on the government side, whether it be FinCEN, the CISA, or IC3, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, they ask for different types of information, which also contributes to a disaggregated picture of the threat. With regard to your second question, Senator, we believe that the mandatory reporting requirement will help the government have a better picture of the actual scale and scope of this threat. We also believe that information needs to get into the hands of the private sector, who, as I mentioned in my testimony, can work with the government to collectively combat these actors when the information is delivered in a timely manner and it is relevant. I do agree significantly with Mr. Siegel's comment that we need to be very structured in the way that the government needs to be very structured in the way that it seeks the information that it will receive under the reporting requirements of the recently passed legislation. It is critical that the information be relevant and that the government is equipped to manage the information, not only in analyzing it itself, but also in ensuring that it can receive and disseminate the information to private sector actors who can appropriately manage the information and take appropriate action with respect to it.
Thank you. During my investigation, federal agencies expressed to my team concerns with gaps in the ability to enforce anti-money laundering laws applicable to cryptocurrency against illicit actors outside of the United States. The report found that such gaps impede law enforcement's ability to investigate, to prosecute, and prevent cryptocurrency-enabled crimes. Ms. Coven, and then Ms. Stiefel, I'll ask you to answer this question after Ms. Coven answers. What shortfalls do you see regarding enforcement of anti-money laundering regulations with respect to illicit cryptocurrency transactions, both in the United States and abroad? And the second question, what has happened to address these shortfalls, and can regulations alone solve this problem, or does Congress have a role here? If you could handle those questions for me now, and then Ms. Stiefel after Ms. Coven.
Thank you for your question, Senator. And yes, we have observed a winnowing down of the cash-out destinations for illicit actors, including ransomware actors, mainly to offshore exchanges with little to no regulation and enforcement, which underscores our recommendation for enhanced U.S. assistance in implementing AML, anti-money laundering laws, to cut off those illicit cash-out destinations. We've also observed the increased utilization of mixing services by these threat actors to obfuscate the destination of these ransomware proceeds. And I can point to a number of government successes over the last year that have actually used blockchain analysis to trace payments to these high-risk exchanges, and law enforcement action against Garantex, Blender.io, ChatX, and SueX, primarily services based in Russia. And what we saw as a result of these designations, especially against SueX, was that deposits dropped nearly to zero as soon as the designations were rolled out. And so there are a number of policy options for these illicit cash-out destinations. And blockchain forensics is a key tool in being able to identify where these threat actors are cashing out. And if we look at Blender.io, the mixing service in particular, it was not only used by multiple ransomware groups, it was also used by North Korean launderers from stolen funds. So these threat actors are going for the path of least resistance, but it has narrowed down considerably to a handful of services that the U.S. can help support with implementing AML regulations.
Thank you, Ms. Coven. Ms. Stiefel?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I would agree with Ms. Coven that the impact of regulation in the United States has resulted in many cases the offshoring of the ability for these actors to convert cryptocurrency into fiat, and as a result, the absence of regulation overseas has provided this pathway for the conversion to continue to facilitate the demand for and the desire for ransomware as a tool to generate financial gain. In other words, were we to have a more consistent regulatory environment internationally through the application of KYC, AML, and other regulatory measures by working with partners, including through the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, that has been effective in the terrorism instances, that would provide a pathway, I think, for there to be a more significant impact on the ability for governments to obtain information that can facilitate arrests or other disruptive measures against these criminal actors. Senator, you also asked about the role of Congress here, and I would agree that there is I think the reporting legislation is a significant step forward. It was something that was called for in our task force report, as you mentioned. I think there's also a need for an opportunity for Congress to continue to also clarify other measures that private sector entities may take with respect to information about cybersecurity incidents, including by clarifying the scope of the Cybersecurity and Information Sharing Act of 2015, and to be constantly mindful of the importance of there being harmony across and not overly complicating matters with respect to ongoing regulatory opportunities, looking to streamline the process to allow for consistency and application so that victims are clear where they need to report, what they need to report, and within what period of time, and also their role in ensuring that they are working to and equipping them to better maintain their systems in a more secure manner to reduce the likelihood of ransomware in the future.
Thank you. Senator Hawley, you are recognized for your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. If I could start with you, Mr. Siegel, you said in your written testimony that financially motivated cyber criminals almost universally denominate ransom demands in cryptocurrency. Can you just expand on that? Why is that, and what are the implications?
Well, for the most part, ransomware actors know that they want to cash out their illicit proceeds using the most efficient means. Cryptocurrency is the most efficient means. It has great scale. They can move it very quickly across borders. It can be moved without worry of being reclaimed unless they make an operational security mistake or unless they move it through an exchange that participates with Western law enforcement. And they also know that they have options to move their proceeds between different types of cryptocurrency, which can further aid in the obfuscation and money laundering process and better the chances that a higher percentage of those ransom proceeds make it to their pocket at the end of the day.
Is there a specific cryptocurrency that is more often used than others for ransom demands, to your knowledge?
Bitcoin is the predominant one, but I would note that some actors denominate their demands in other privacy-enhanced cryptocurrencies like Monero. And even when Bitcoin is used for a ransom payment, it is common for the Bitcoin to be exchanged into one of these privacy coins further down the money laundering process to obfuscate the end destination.
Got it. Let me ask you this. I understand that there's about 10,000 active cryptocurrencies. That's up from 63, I think it was, just a decade ago, and that's incredible growth. Has the growing number of cryptocurrencies influenced how ransom demands are being made, in your observation?
No, it hasn't.
Interesting. Are new coins being made with criminal intentions in mind, do you think?
It's certainly possible. I would bifurcate between new coins that are made with the express intent of just committing financial fraud via these kind of pump and dump schemes, and then what would appear to be legitimate projects, right, like Monero and others, that are just aimed at the enhanced privacy of the coin itself, but with that come the attractiveness to the cyber criminals to use those coins for the money laundering process.
Are new coins being purposely designed or being made and purposely designed to be more opaque, in your observation?
Some of these privacy coins are. That is the intention of the design, is to make them more private. I would note, though, that there's two challenges to having a coin actually be adopted by a large group of cyber criminals. Number one, it has to work, and number two, it must be liquid. If there's thousands of completely illiquid privacy coins, but you can't really buy or sell them, no one's going to use them, including cyber criminals. This is one of the reasons that Bitcoin is predominantly used, is because it is the most liquid.
Got it. Ms. Cohen, let me ask you, you said just a minute ago that the use of crypto can actually enhance these investigations into ransomware demands. You said in your written testimony, that due to its transparent nature, it can be much easier to investigate cases involving the illicit use of cryptocurrency than other forms of payment. Can you just expand on that? I think that's an interesting point, maybe a counterintuitive point. So can you just say more about that?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So as Mr. Siegel testified, Bitcoin is the predominant currency demanded in these ransomware cases. And what blockchain forensics and the transparency of the blockchain can provide is able to see the cash out destination of these currencies to exchanges that enables law enforcement to subpoena those exchanges for KYC, know your customer information, as well as potentially freeze the accounts. And we can also move further up the kill chain to understand that threat actor in their wallet and the goods and services that they are purchasing that actually comprise that campaign. Everything from malware as a service, access brokers, to compromised credentials and victim systems, to malware cryptors, and all of those networks that are underpinning these attacks.
So why do you think it is that criminals are disproportionately using cryptocurrencies as opposed to, say, U.S. dollars? Do you agree with Mr. Siegel's analysis? I mean, what would you say about that?
Thank you. So the same reason that Bitcoin is attractive to criminals is the same reason it's attractive for trading and a store of value. We've actually calculated that only 0.14% of overall transaction activity was criminal related of the 15 trillion that was of transactions last year. And it is the liquidity issue. Monero is illiquid, and it is impractical to use. Many cryptocurrency exchanges have delisted Monero because of regulatory guidance about Monero and privacy coins in general.
Very good. Let me just ask both of you about reporting requirements. I think, Mr. Siegel, in your written testimony, you note that reporting requirements could burden federal agencies with unstructured data that can't be paired or analyzed at scale. Have I got that right? Am I remembering correctly? So just give me a sense, in light of that, how should agencies optimally implement reporting requirements so that they are effective?
Sure. I believe that agencies should look to establish standardized frameworks such as NIST or the MITRE ATT&CK framework that standardize the tactics, techniques, and procedures that the threat actors are utilizing. These frameworks come with standard hierarchies, standard names, standard codes. Ransomware attacks are incredibly repetitive. And so the value of collecting, the bottom end, the unstructured log data, which could be hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes for a single attack, is very minimal. But the value in abstracting that up a couple layers of altitude to just the tactics and techniques and procedures so that CISA could very quickly say, okay, we've got 10 reports that happened last week. They all use these same tactics. These are tactics that we haven't seen before. Let's get a timely warning out. Conversely, if they were to collect the unstructured data, it could require an army of individuals to perform weeks of forensic analysis before those same conclusions could be reached.
Do you have a view on this, Ms. Coven, about the optimal implementation of reporting requirements by agencies?
No, I agree with Mr. Siegel that the standardization is extremely important to be able to operationalize that information swiftly so that they can be used to subpoena cryptocurrency businesses and used for attribution and accountability of these threat actors. And we'd seen this in multiple high-profile cases, including the NetWalker ransomware takedown, where the most prominent affiliate of that group was actually arrested in Canada. So I think being able to operationalize and share these at scale can lead to further successes.
Very good. Thanks to you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Next we have Senator Lankford, but Senator Lankford, I understand, has graciously agreed to recognize Senator Rosen, who has to preside. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Lankford. I appreciate it. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here and testifying today. As a former software developer, I helped to develop company-wide disaster recovery plans, develop and execute them, all the different scenarios. So I have both experience and many thoughts on this matter, but we'll talk about cryptocurrency today. And so I want to talk a little bit about small business cybersecurity, because as the HISGAC majority staff report on ransomware and cryptocurrency outlines, all it takes is one ransomware attack to cause a small company, their business, was vulnerable to a cyber attack. Of course, many businesses can't afford to adopt professional IT solutions, hire cybersecurity professionals, and actually they have a limited time to devote to cybersecurity as they focus on growing their companies. So to help small business manage cyber risk, Senator Cornyn and I introduced the Improving Cybersecurity of Small Entities Act. This is bipartisan legislation to direct federal agencies to develop common-sense cybersecurity recommendations, provide training for those small entities, including small businesses. And this legislation passed this committee in February, and hopefully it would tell people the importance of off-site backups and how they use their journals, all kinds of things like that. Of course, we know that they need to recover. But ransomware, Mr. Siegel, how do the ransomware criminals, how do they choose their victims in the small business community? What are some of the trends that you're seeing? And in terms of tactics and techniques, what are they using specifically? Are they just going after the data? Are they going after modifying the programs with malware where backups may not be, restoring backups may not be as effective or effective at all?
Thank you for your question, Senator. We would describe ransomware attacks as opportunistic, not targeted. We view this problem as an economic problem, and targeting a specific company is uneconomical. There are numerous ways that ransomware actors can impact a small business or a large business, and most of those ways come from purchasing previously breached credentials, or by mass scanning the internet through free or freely available tools that allow them to look for vulnerabilities. So they essentially are combing the internet, picking up lists very quickly, finding the lowest hanging fruit, and then attacking those companies. For instance, at the other end of the spectrum, the Colonial Pipeline attacks, I wholeheartedly believe that that was not a targeted attack meant to disrupt the U.S. critical infrastructure. I don't think those attackers had any clue that that company controlled the volume of gasoline on the East Coast, and that would create a political issue, and that U.S. consumers really don't like it when gas prices go up, and that it would cause a geopolitical issue. I think they saw a big energy company with a large balance sheet and the potential for a large ransom. And I think that same thinking applies to small businesses. When they find a target that's going to take them 15 to 20 minutes to compromise, and they can earn $50,000 to $100,000 potentially of a ransom payment, that is too economical to not do. And so a lot of the recommendations that we've made in our testimony and a lot of things that we talk about are to recognize that there is no silver bullet to this problem, but there are lots of different ways to impose costs. The ransomware kill chain, as we've discussed today, is one of those ways. But these incremental ways that companies can incrementally harden themselves to make themselves harder targets, more expensive targets, we think are the best ways to actually achieve an exponential reduction in risk versus a linear one as may be perceived with just making small additions. But the reality is most small businesses have these very, very easy to exploit vulnerabilities present, and closing those vulnerabilities is a process of just knowing what they are and finding the time or budget to close them.
Thank you. I agree with what you're saying, and obviously the data is bearing it out. In the 2 minutes I have left, I want to move over to healthcare cybersecurity because, of course, this is really been increasing attacks on our hospitals and clinics, and as we even use more medical devices, we understand the vulnerabilities there. In the FBI's 2021 Internet Crime Report, the healthcare sector fell victim to ransomware far more than any other critical infrastructure sector last year. So healthcare entities increasingly the target of these malicious cyber attacks. They result not only in data breaches, but driving up the cost of care and maybe ultimately even affecting patients' outcomes. And so Senator Cassidy and I introduced the Healthcare Cybersecurity Act. Again, it's bipartisan legislation that would require CISA to coordinate with and make resources available to healthcare and public health sector entities, including by developing products tailored to the specific needs of small and rural hospitals. They've been a big target, and our health clinics. So Mr. Siegel and then Ms. Coven, with the ransomware criminals rapidly evolving their tactics, techniques, and procedures, how do you think this variety of healthcare entities can stay ahead of these threats and heighten their defenses against ransomware?
Thank you, Senator. I can testify from experience having dealt with a number of hospital cases that there is nothing more horrific than a ransomware attack on a healthcare institution that puts patient care at risk. And it's the most sensitive areas, the ER, the NICU, oncology, that depend on EMR software to provide critical patient care. And when those things go down, that care cannot be delivered. Our sense is that, especially for critical infrastructure companies, having proper security is no different than the maintenance of a bridge. It is part of the cost of doing business, and it should be properly overseen and properly regulated. As these attacks and these tactics evolve, there is no getting around these organizations making a substantial and continued investment in their people, in their technology, so that they can stay ahead of these things and continue to provide this critical care.
I know I only have a couple seconds left. I have to go preside. Can you speak briefly to it? And then I'm going to run to the presiding chair on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. It's easy to lose the human cost and the toll when you look at ransomware figures like 712 million paid. Those smaller businesses and hospitals, for example, we have actually calculated the median ransom payment is $6,000. So potentially smaller victims that don't necessarily make headlines, but the impact is still devastating. And whether or not these institutions pay, it can still be devastating with the cost of remediation. And the other issue is that a lot of these Smaller businesses and hospitals are not necessarily equipped to be able to understand the sanctions risk of potential payments. And so being able to support them in that way is important. I'll also add that the threat actors that are targeting the small businesses are also targeting the hospitals and other forms of infrastructure. So being able to shine a light on those tools and services, those threat actors that are underpinning this criminal economy that is driving ransomware is critical to disrupting ransomware.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you again, Senator Langford. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Langford, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Thanks to all the witnesses that are here. I want to walk through a little bit of the reporting and of the cooperation and duplication within government. Just back of the envelope, as I look at this, FBI, CISA, HSI, Treasury, Secret Service, SEC, all have cryptocurrency entities, all say, report to us, we want to be able to help through all this process. From entities on the outside working with this cornucopia of three-letter agencies that are across the federal government that all have a cryptocurrency, crypto crimes section of it. What does that look like? What are you getting as far as feedback? And I'd really like all three of you to be able to respond to that. All three of you have some insight in there. Siegel, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, while it would be great if one agency could handle all this, the reality is all the agencies have a specific role and function in imposing cost on these threat actors. And I think the legislation that has recently been passed has taken the appropriate first step of designating a single agency and possible cooperating agencies to handle the initial inbound and triage of the reporting data, and then routing that information to the proper branches for investigations of different shapes and sizes. I think it was noted in the CEO of Colonial Pipeline's testimony, some of the frustration that he felt at being overwhelmed with the volume of inbound duplicative requests from law enforcement agencies and regulators while he was trying to manage his company through an incident. And I felt for Mr. Blunt during that testimony. It can be distracting if a victim of ransomware contacts the wrong agency. It can be distracting, and so I think that it is important through this legislation and the rulemaking process that it be made crystal clear where victims of ransomware are based on their state jurisdiction, regulatory jurisdiction by industry, where they should go and what those requirements are, so that the private industry, principally attorneys that advise and assist these victims, can study this and then give practical, timely advice and direct those victims to the proper agency in a timely manner.
Let's go.
Thank you, Senator. I commend the legislation, specifically the tenets, to aggregate and standardize the reporting. As an example, our data has recorded 14 times more ransomware payments than what was reported to FBI via IC3. And this legislation will help bolster their intelligence. And in order to handle this amount of data coming their way, I would hope the agencies are resourced appropriately with the tools and resources they need to operationalize this information that can lead to the arrest and seizures of cryptocurrency payments. And we've seen a number of successes from multiple agencies over the last year targeting various facets of the kill chain, targeting those illicit cash-out destinations that are laundering the proceeds, targeting specific threat actors and holding them accountable, and imposing costs by denying them of the cryptocurrency payment that they sought. So enhanced training and tools to be able to operationalize the influx of data, but also I think global cooperation with U.S. Agencies and global agencies is very important, as the threats that are facing our global partners are also the same ones that are attacking us today.
We'll come back to that. Safa?
Thank you, Senator. I would agree with my fellow witnesses that there needs to be, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, greater clarity and simplicity in the ability for victims to share information with the government. The other piece of this, of course, though, is that as Ms. Coven just alluded to, there is a significant need for there to be adequate resources within departments and agencies to both ingest the information, but also really to establish those relationships in the first place that facilitate this information sharing from victims to the government. Some will be required to do so under the legislation once the rulemaking process is complete, but others will not. And so the ability to have adequate resources within the field, whether it be within CISA's regional staff members, whether it's with Secret Service or FBI agents, it's really critical to establish those relationships within the community in order to better equip the government as well as the private sector to play a meaningful role in combating ransomware and wherever we, as I mentioned, find cyber criminals going next.
When you say the community, you're not talking about individual businesses. You're talking about entities that actually coordinate this, private businesses that work with other private businesses to be able to protect them from ransomware. Is that correct?
It's both, I would say. Yes, it is. It is those who are working to help victims manage their unfortunate ransomware incident. But actually, we often talk about and encourage organizations to establish a relationship with CISA and with FBI before they become the victim of an incident. It's better to have that, to know who to call and what may be useful to the government, learn that information ahead of time so that when the unfortunate day occurs, there is already an established working relationship, and that can facilitate a much more rapid response, both for the government but also for the victim.
Yeah, that is part of the challenge that I lay out here, though. You don't know whether that relationship is with FBI, with CISA, with HSI, with Treasury, with Secret Service, with who that might be. And so it's one thing to be able to say they need to develop relationships, but to be able to maintain relationships with all those entities because they all will come calling. And I left out, even you were talking about the Colonial Pipeline with DOT, they may show up as well, and multiple other entities that would show up as regulators to say, did you fill out the paperwork about? This is still a convoluted mess at the worst possible moment for a company, for a hospital, whatever it may be, that just had a ransomware attack, and now they're getting bombarded with all these different federal entities calling them and wanting information and details on this. There has to be a single source. I know we're in the process of working that through, but we've got to also not just have one as a primary, but the others turn that off in the process of going through that. I do need to clarify as well, Ms. Coven, you talked about trying to be able to actually follow through, arrest, recover the information from the chairman's information of what they've worked through already on this. 74% of the entities that are doing ransomware are Russian or Russian affiliated or Russian controlled. The recovery at that point in working with local law enforcement, clearly they're not going to cooperate. What's the best tool at this point to be able to get engagement?
Thank you for that question, Senator, and that's of primary focus for us. There's been several examples over the last year that have illustrated that even if the perpetrator is out of reach of U.S. law enforcement, we can still impose costs, we can still seize assets, we can leverage our global partnerships to be able to triangulate these threat actors. And we've also taken actions against their cash-out destinations. A lot of Russian-based services like Garantex, Suex, and Chadex have been on the designation list, and it's severely inhibited their businesses. So there's a number of ways we can still impose costs and then also work up the kill chain to identify those threat actors and enablers, that access brokers, malware as a service providers, that are also fueling these campaigns. And if the NetWalker case is any example, this is a global problem. That NetWalker affiliate was a Canadian-based individual and the most profitable affiliate of that cybercrime ring.
Okay. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Hassan, you're recognized for your questions.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you and the ranking member for holding this hearing, and to all of our witnesses, thank you for sharing your expertise with us and for being here today. I want to start with a question to Ms. Stiefel. Cryptocurrency can be used for illicit purposes, including in cyber attacks, such as when most of the $2.3 million stolen from the town of Peterborough, New Hampshire, was quickly converted to cryptocurrency to make it unrecoverable. Last September, I wrote letters to several agencies, including the Department of Justice, the IRS, and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, asking what actions the federal government can take to help reduce the illicit use of cryptocurrencies. In the IRS's response to my letter, the agency made several suggestions, including increasing Know Your Customer requirements and strengthening suspicious activity reporting compliance for businesses connected to cryptocurrency markets. So Ms. Stiefel, could you discuss why these are important and how you would strengthen these requirements to help combat illicit uses of cryptocurrency?
Thank you, Senator. The utility of KYC requirements, suspicious activity reports, and other mechanisms through which the government can receive information about ransomware attacks and particularly payments associated with them is essential to, as we talked about, following the money and facilitating not only industry but also the government in getting an adequate picture of what is happening with these payments, the affiliates and the actors who are continuing to launch these types of incidents. Unfortunately, though, as we've also talked about today, there is inadequate and inconsistent compliance with these requirements, particularly when you leave the United States jurisdiction. I would also note, though, that there are, and as are hopefully clear in the diagram that I shared in my written testimony, there are a number of other entities within the kill chain that may not have reporting requirements, but may have relevant information. And oftentimes they currently work with each other to share that information with the government. So I think there's an opportunity to look at the other ways through which the government can obtain information, not necessarily from those who are currently subject to KYC and AML requirements.
Well, thank you, and we will follow up with you on your diagram and information as well. To both Ms. Coven and Ms. Stiefel, in your written testimony, both of you commented that sanctions can be effective in preventing criminals from receiving or laundering ransomware payments. Do you believe that the federal government should be more aggressively sanction ransomware groups and entities that help launder ransom payments? And what are the barriers to implementing more aggressive sanctions? And we'll start with you, Ms. Coven.
Thank you for your question, Senator. I defer to policymakers on whether more sanctions should be enforced, but I will say that the impact of sanctions on some of these services that had been identified as participating in ransomware laundering, Garantech, Suex, Chadex, Blender, the mixing service, sanctions have been catastrophic to their business, impacting, severely damaging their operations. There's also been designations against specific individuals tied to ransomware groups. I think we've also seen that sanctions have impacted ransomware groups' ability to receive payments from certain victims once they're designated, because they can use blockchain forensics to actually identify ransomware groups rebranding, trying to obfuscate their connection to sanctioned entities. So we do provide tools and services for transaction monitoring to identify if a payment is made to a sanctioned jurisdiction or potentially sanctioned entity. And I think further implementation of those can also help prevent or identify any kind of sanctions violations.
Thank you. Ms. Stiefel?
Thank you, Senator. In the task force's report that we published last year, we noted that, and as has been also discussed in the hearing today, the need for an all-tools approach to combating ransomware. And as Ms. Coven has mentioned, and we've also seen recent reports from members of the administration, it appears that sanctions have been effective in reducing the ability for ransomware actors to cash out their proceeds. So that suggests that they have been an effective tool. And with respect to your question about what barriers exist to the use of sanctions in this kind of all-tools approach, I would point to the concern around the degree of information that is reported about ransomware activity without an adequate picture of the scale and scope of this type of cybercrime. It inhibits the government's ability to identify and develop that sanctions package that allows them to fulfill the requirements under the sanctions laws and regulations, to have sufficient evidence to designate a particular entity, and then to for the private sector to then follow through with their requirements to prohibit and limit the ability for those actors to gain their proceeds.
Thank you. Mr. Siegel, in your written testimony, you indicated that some ransomware victims do not want law enforcement to try to recover their ransomware payment because they're worried that the criminals won't honor the commitments made in return for the ransom payment. This obviously presents a potential problem because those payments make ransomware profitable and help facilitate future cyber attacks. There are also likely other victims who do not want to involve law enforcement at all. In your experience working with ransomware victims, what percentage of victims do not want to recover their payments, even if they're given a viable option? What percentage of victims don't want to involve law enforcement at all? And what do you think we could do to alleviate their worries?
Well, I would say that if it were a risk that the victims wouldn't get their deliverables, the decryption keys, or these things, which they are apprised that as a potential risk, that number could fluctuate, between 0 and 100%. I would say that in general, probably close to half of victims would volunteer to have their money seized or reclaimed because they're not as concerned about possible recrimination from the threat actors. As it relates to non-reporting, in the absence of requirements, I would say that the minority of victims of ransomware would even bother because it's a hassle to them and they want to get on with their life. One of the most challenging aspects that we cited in our discussions with the staff ahead of this were the ability for law enforcement to proactively reapproach victims to collect evidence in the proper format so that it can be submitted as evidence to secure indictments. Right. This process can take months, sometimes years. And when reapproached, the percentage of those victims that voluntarily participate is very, very low. And that is very frustrating to law enforcement. Yeah. And so I think that we now have through this rulemaking and through mandatory reporting, the door is now open to try and not only collect more accurate information through the reporting, but create mechanisms whereby law enforcement can reapproach victims of attacks and secure the evidence necessary to achieve these indictments. I'd also note for your prior questions, a lot of the ability for our agencies to sanction these groups depend on the investigations. Right. And when those investigations can't conclude, we can't get to the finish line on imposing sanctions.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Ms. Cove, you testified earlier that only, I think it's 0.15% of cryptocurrencies are used in illicit transactions. And yet, according to your report, in 2022 report, the illicit use of cryptocurrency has grown from $7.8 billion in 2020 to an all-time high of $14 billion in 2021. And the report explicitly acknowledges that such illicit activity, quote, represents a significant problem. Now, clearly, you have a very small percentage there, but I think the vast majority of all the transactions in crypto are people just speculating back and forth, kind of similar to the Dutch tulip mania as they bid the prices up. My question to you, though, is do we know the percentage of cryptocurrency that's actually used to buy a legitimate good or service? I don't think folks are going to Walmart or CVS, but are people actually using this to buy something? What percentage?
Thank you for that question, Senator. And yes, we had noted 0.14% of transactions last year had an illicit component to it, and the vast majority of transactions were legitimate. Trading, remittances, and viewing cryptocurrency as a store of value. I would say that
what percentage? What percentage are actually for products and goods?
I don't have that answer on hand. My team can get back to you, but I would say it's a near daily occurrence that a new business that you and I might frequent is offering cryptocurrency as a form of payment. While it's not certainly prolific, you can't pay your rent in cryptocurrency today. There are more and more businesses that are adopting cryptocurrency as a form of payment. And this is especially, and this is a global phenomenon. You can find more available in other jurisdictions. And what I will say is that, because it is more difficult to buy goods and services with cryptocurrency today, it's why individuals and even threat actors rely on cryptocurrency businesses like exchanges to convert their cryptocurrency to other forms of fiat like dollars and euros, which is a great intelligence lead for investigations.
Very good. Senator Sinema, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. Ransomware attacks have wreaked havoc on communities across Arizona and our country, from last year's attack on the city of Kingman to the recent attempted hack against Yuma Regional Medical Center. Ransomware disrupts our lives, breaches sensitive data, and causes real-world harm. Our bipartisan infrastructure law invests in state and local cybersecurity to combat ransomware, and I co-sponsored legislation creating new cyber incident reporting requirements. So we need to continue to work together to enhance our cybersecurity and hold hackers and the countries that provide them safe harbor accountable. So my first question is for you, Ms. Coven. In March, your company's co-founder testified before the Senate Banking Committee. I asked him about some of the more sophisticated techniques used by ransomware gangs to make ransom payments harder to trace, including the use of mixer and tumbler services to combine cryptocurrency from illicit sources with crypto from lawful sources. Mr. Levin noted that chain analysis has actually been able to successfully demix certain transactions. Without revealing your specific demixing capabilities, could you expand on this, and how great of a threat to ransomware investigations do cryptocurrency mixers currently pose?
Thank you for your question. And this is an especially important topic because we have identified mixers being incorporated more frequently into ransomware laundering techniques. And as you mentioned, we have recently publicly disclosed our demixing capabilities. And while we can't go into details because of ongoing investigations, what I can say is that we make every effort to identify all available mixers that these threat actors might be able to use so that our law enforcement partners and investigators, when conducting and tracking ransomware payments, can understand when they're tracing into a mixer and do not attempt to trace through it.
You help victims negotiate with hackers and protect their specific company from further harm. While paying a ransom might be the smart move for a particular victim, these payments are the fuel that motivates hackers to keep launching additional attacks. So how do you balance the immediate need to restore a client's systems with the concern that paying a ransom might put a target on your client's back in the future? And when the decision is made to pay the ransom, how do you ensure that crypto is not sent in violation of U.S. sanctions, particularly given how many attacks are linked to countries like Russia and North Korea?
Thank you for your question. With regards to the first part on how the decision is made, the use of data is key. There are certain types of ransomware that can cause a substantial amount of file corruption. There are certain threat actors that default if paid, i.e. they don't provide the decryption tools or keys. And so providing accurate information on the forecasted outcome of what will actually happen if a ransom is paid is step number one, so that the company can make a clear decision. Step number two is for the company to understand that this is an option of last resort. It has to be weighed against all other available paths to restore critical data. And if there's one myth with ransom payments, it's that it's easy and it's fast. It's the exact opposite. The vast majority of the time when companies have adequate backups, even if those backups are going to take a very long time to recover, that is actually faster and is going to avail them to a much quicker recovery time than paying a ransom. So step number one is to make sure that they understand the facts and that they're making a good data-driven decision. To your second question about compliance, our firm has developed a comprehensive compliance program. It comes from our background. I came from the regulated financial services industry and ran and built large comprehensive compliance programs. We took with us that compliance program when we founded our company. And so we do three principal things that revolve around the attribution of the threat actor and other characteristics of the attack. Number one is we are looking at qualitative, technical, forensic, and cryptocurrency information to check along the lines of common Bank Secrecy Act, Know Your Customer lines, that the threat actor is not immediately listed on any sanctions list, both domestically and internationally. Number two, we're looking at the wallet address using products like chain analysis to determine if the wallet is clustered or co-spent with any sanctioned wallets. And number three, most poignantly, is we keep our own internal restricted list whereby we are tracking all the known sanctioned actors, and as they change their identity and further try and obfuscate who they are over time, we're tracking these things so that when the same threat actor that was sanctioned a year ago is on variant number 7 to try and obfuscate their identity, we can identify it. That's actually the vast majority of the time when there is a sanctions issue in an active incident. It is not a one-for-one identification of this name that you were attacked by is on an actual list. It is this name that you were attacked by is actually this person or group, and here's the evidence of how we've made that attribution. So we perform all of these checks well ahead of any payment being made. We provide all those facts and circumstances to the victim and allow them to make the decision accordingly.
Thank you. Ms. Coven, the hackers behind some of the most devastating ransomware attacks are often located, or in some cases even sponsored, by the governments of countries like Russia, North Korea, China, Iran. This means that even when we're able to identify those behind an attack, our criminal justice system isn't able to hold those hackers accountable. And that makes it particularly important that we successfully recover more ransom payments so these attackers, at the minimum, aren't rewarded for their crimes. What lessons can we learn from the FBI's successful recovery of much of the cryptocurrency used to pay the Colonial Pipeline ransom? And with enhanced public-private partnerships and data sharing, is it feasible to help ransomware victims recover ransom payments on a more routine basis?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Yes, we have identified nearly 74% of ransom payments have a Russian affiliation. And we have seen over the last year several successes, including the Colonial Pipeline, of asset recovery of from threat actors that exist outside of U.S.-friendly jurisdictions. Not only is asset seizure a powerful tool, but we've also been able to cripple some of the primary cash-out destinations, including those exchanges based in Russia like Garantex, Suex, and Chadex that laundered a large amount of ransomware proceeds. I'd further like to say there's been nearly $50 million in ransomware funds seized from ransomware-related actors. And there's also the risk of nation-state actors getting involved in ransomware that aren't focused on the monetary reward, but are using ransomware as a cover for more strategic aims of espionage and disruption. So then the question then becomes, how did these nation-state actors get their hands on those tools and services to conduct the attack? And blockchain forensics can shine a bright light on those necessary tools and services that facilitate nation-state actors as well as financially motivated criminal gangs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. Ms. Cohen, I want to go back to the questions that I was asking related to transactions for goods and services. You said a lot of businesses now are starting to accept crypto. Do you have any numbers or any estimate as to what you're seeing in that area?
Senator, I apologize. I do not have those figures on hand, but we can get back to you. What I did want to say previously is that we'd seen a 500% increase in cryptocurrency transactions in the last year. And we've seen many institutional players getting involved in cryptocurrency and viewing it as an asset class. So this has accelerated the adoption of cryptocurrency for legitimate use cases. And as you pointed out, also an increase in the raw number of illicit transactions that we've been able to detect was 14 billion last year.
But I want to be clear, when you talk about all the transactions, these are investment transactions. They're not an increase of transactions of people actually going out and buying stuff. And maybe help me, if you're a business, you say you'll accept crypto to pay for a service. If you accept dollars, you know the dollar tomorrow will still be worth $1, and next week it's still going to be worth $1. But crypto, like yesterday, I think many of the major cryptos dropped 9%, a 10% drop. That would be like the Dow Jones dropping 3,000 points in a day, which is a pretty huge drop. So if you're a business, you'll say, I'll sell you a product for crypto, but it may be worth 10% less tomorrow. I don't know what it'll be worth. It could be worth up. It could be greater, I guess, as well. But based on what we've seen recently, it's been falling because it is a highly speculative asset. What's the incentive for a business to take crypto as opposed to $1 when they're trading for an actual service?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I'm possibly not best suited to answer that question in my current role, but what I will say is that many investors are in cryptocurrency for the long haul, and they've experienced dips and spikes in the ecosystem over the past few years. Same with threat actors. They are also dealing with cryptocurrency, viewing it as a long-term investment. But we can get back to you on specific numbers if you'd like, sir.
Yeah, I'd be just curious if you're going to track this. What it's clearly we all know it's a speculative asset that people are investing in, and it's highly volatile. We get that. But it is a medium of exchange, and most people think of a medium of exchange as that it's going to be fairly consistent worth. If you buy a good from me and you give me $1, I'll be able to buy $1 worth of another good somewhere else in the next day or two or whenever it may be, which is different than a speculative stock or investing in stock options or other kinds of speculative assets. They're different. But we do know that for a variety of reasons, as we've heard today, that criminals are very attracted to crypto, and that's a big part of what the currency is used in. The actual kind of goods or services transaction is illicit. It's criminals that use this currency. In addition to speculators, it's criminals. Seems to be using crypto. So my question for Ms. Stiffel, are there some additional tools that could help the federal government recover cryptocurrency ransom payments that have already been made? What additional tools should we be thinking about?
Thank you, Senator. I think one of the biggest tools that can be made, and in part thanks to the work of this committee has been made, is investing both in the cyber funds and emergency authorities that have come through the legislation that's been passed, but also thinking about what we've talked about previously, is better equipping departments and agencies to manage the investigatory process that is required in order to follow the money through the blockchain. Those investments also would be useful to better equip departments and agencies to engage their international counterparts and to push for the broader application of KYC, AML, and other measures more broadly internationally, including, as I mentioned, through the Financial Action Task Force, but in other multilateral bodies where working with Europol, for example, or Interpol, more effective engagement can be made with counterparts in a range of countries where we know that cyber criminals are turning. For example, looking at Costa Rica, Peru, most recently. The United States is not the only country targeted with ransomware, and it's essential to really combat this at global scale that we have partners in a range of jurisdictions who are able to meaningfully engage with us as we seek to investigate these malicious activities.
Thank you. And Ms. Coven, last question here. If you could explain to the committee, talk a little bit more about unhosted wallets and what risk exists when crypto is transferred to unregulated peer-to-peer exchanges and unhosted wallets. What should we know about that?
Thank you for your question. If I may address the previous comment, I do want to say that cryptocurrency is a technology, and as long as technologies have existed, there's always been bad actors willing to exploit it. Yes, there is significant volatility in cryptocurrency, but there is the mechanism of stable coins, which can hold value. We do see legitimate trading activity as well as cryptocurrencies used in remittances. And it is an opportunity for the U.S. to be a key predominant player in this financial ecosystem by harnessing this technology, and the applications that can be built on top of it provide tremendous opportunity and job growth for national security. What I want to say about private wallets, we do focus on identifying services, exchanges, darknet markets, ransom payments, but in the course of our investigations, we do sometimes come across private wallets belonging to a threat actor, which allows us to monitor that wallet and also understand that threat actor's spending habits, all the tools and services purchased by that threat actor, and also cash out destinations like peer-to-peer or cryptocurrency exchanges. And peer-to-peer services are also obliged to regulatory requirements, AML, CFT requirements that do require KYC and other forms of identification.
Right. Well, thank you. Well, I want to thank all of our witnesses for participating in today's discussion, and I look forward to building on what we've learned from today's testimony, including additional ways to combat the national and economic security threats posed by ransomware attacks. I plan to continue my investigation to further examine the role cryptocurrencies play in these cyber crimes and other criminal activities. And I look forward to exploring the issues identified during today's hearing in detail, including shortfalls in the enforcement of applicable anti-money laundering regulations for cryptocurrency transaction. The record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until 5 p.m. on June 22nd of 2022 for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.